When we launch Minecraft today, we have no idea how the game works. Mobs live their lives peacefully, structures and biomes are generated, and the entire world of Minecraft comes to life. But sometimes we stumble upon bugs. They are present in every version of the game, and there is no getting rid of them. You fix one bug, and 3 new ones appeared in its place. It's like learning Hydra. The more heads you cut off, the more new ones grow back. Today, I decided to dive into the history of bugs, find out which bugs were found in the very first version of the game, and which ones later even become a full-fledged Minecraft features. Our journey will begin in 2009 with the pre-classic version and end with the 2016 combat update. Yes, the video is divided into 2 parts. The second part, in which we will cover versions from 1.10 to 1.21, will be released as soon as we get 1000 likes here. The story begins with the pre-classic version. Yes, the one where there was nothing but blocks of grass, cobblestones and air. Players didn't even exist as characters at the time. It may sound strange, but this version was one big bug. The world was limited, and if you fell outside its boundaries, you would fly forever. There was no restart button, no world creation, nothing. I talk about this version in more detail in the retrospective video. The link is in the description. The classic version is legendary. It was no longer just a sandbox test, but the first attempt to show what the game could become. You could place blocks, break them, and switch between modes. There were so many bugs that Notch wrote a warning about them every time he posted a new version on the forum. Of course, the most significant and iconic bug is the creeper. It was originally supposed to be a pig, but Notch mixed up the height and width values, and the result was a strange pig that later became not just a mob, but a symbol of the game. But you already know that. As development was in full swing, bugs were encountered, but most of them were not that significant. For example, when the human mob appeared, for some reason his head was always turned towards his back, and the skin itself created an optical illusion. It looked a little creepy. But besides the creepy bugs, there were also funny ones, such as when a creeper exploded in water, water blocks would fall out after the explosion. The most famous bug, in my opinion, is the ability to change the player position on the Y-axis. By jumping and reloading the area each time, the player would rise until the game crashed with an error. Of course, you couldn't fly, but it was fun. The classic version was replaced by Indev. Yes, the one with unique mob models without movement animations. You could consider this a bug, but in reality it was just Notch's problem. He simply couldn't implement the animation correctly into the game code. But that's not what this version is famous for. Various types of generation appeared. Flying islands and hell version of the world where everything was covered in lava. These worlds broke with remarkable frequency. Perhaps we should start with debugging. Technically, it's not a bug, but a feature, since Notch simply forgot to disable this feature before the release. If you placed a TNT block and then destroyed, the layer beneath it turned into wood. This was used by Notch to debug the flood. The thing is, you could accidentally create a flood. Literally, not only from water but also from lava. This can also be counted among the iconic bugs of this particular version. There was also a bug with the X. If you started chopping wood with it and switched tools several times, instead of a wood block, multicolored blocks were generated. This version also introduced the X-ray bug for the first time. To use it, you just had to dig up a few blocks beneath you and place a new one in block where the player was standing. Piston didn't exist yet, so you didn't have to try too hard. And in general, there was no need to such research, since resource gathering wasn't difficult. Infdev is the moment when Minecraft lost its boundaries. Literally, it was in this version that the world first became infinite. You could go forward forever, but with infinity came infinite bugs. Perhaps the most significant bug was the Farlands. Yes, this game space originally appeared by accident, due to an error in the node generation that the game uses to create the landscape. It could be found at coordinates 12.5 million blocks. Without the intervention of modifications, it was very difficult to get there. Terrible things happen in this place. Items were duplicated, the landscape seems to move along with the players, and in general, when you looked at something like that, it made you feel uncomfortable. But this bug remained forever in hearts of fans and became even more deeply rooted in various hypotheses and theories about Minecraft. Since the previous version added a survival mode to the game, arrows appeared, and the bow was already available to the player by default. Every time a player shot at a solid block that wasn't a liquid, mobs would appear instead of arrows. It's funny that even skeletons could summon other the mobs with their arrows if they landed on the ground. All of this could be avoided by turning on peaceful difficulty. The next iconic bug is monoliths. These are glitchy areas that appeared in later version of Infdev and early alpha version of the game. These monoliths caused a sharpened version of the terrain, where the natural terrain was replaced by air and water up to the height limit and vice versa. They were quite rare but difficult to miss. There was another small bug, or to be precise, a glitch. After placing a door on a glass, a slab, a ladder, or a sign, the door would duplicate itself. A minor issue, but a nice touch. There were many similar bugs. For example, if you placed a door on a farmland, half of the door would simply disappear and become non-functional. And as soon as the player placed a ladder on a torch, it would become invisible but keep lifting players. That's not all. If you place several sand blocks on a sign and then break the bottom one, the rest will start to jump. They cannot be destroyed unless you restart the game, but then the blocks on the top will remain hidden in the air. Alpha is the period from mid-2010, when the game began to take shape close to what we know today. The first biomes appeared, Redstone replaced gears, world saves and even fishing were added. But along with this came some very real, high-profile bugs that later become part of the game. In my opinion, one of the most important bugs was the minecart boosters. The thing is, at the beginning of the game, there were common rails and the movement speed left much to be desired. Players discovered that when one minecart collided with another while moving, the first one accelerated. This gave Nudge the idea of adding powered rails, which appeared in the beta version of the game. Remember when there was an achievement called When Pigs Fly? Well, that was also due to a bug. If a player used a fishing rod at the right angle while riding a pig, they could fly up into the air. It wasn't a replacement for flying, but it was fun. At the time, Minecraft YouTubers were already appearing, and one of them was Etho. He was able to discover the wood generator. I hope you still remember the days where the boats would break when they collided with a block, and instead of a boat, resources would drop out. Of course, fewer resources dropped than were used for crafting. But when a player placed cacti and water and made a hole in the middle, then placed a boat in a hole, more resources dropped. Chests behaved very strangely at the time. For example, if you placed several of them in water, they would combine their storage and even function. In this version, Nether appeared, and Nudge forgot to remove the debugging function again. So by pressing the F4 key, the player could instantly place Nether portal endlessly. Development of the beta version began with the feeling that the game was about to be finished, but in reality, it was just the beginning. Pets were added to help players maintain their home position, achievements and player statistics were finally implemented, along with the full creative menu and dynamic weather. Developing the game became difficult, so Jeb joined the team. Yes, the tall red-haired guy who is still working on the game. The first thing he decided to add was a mob, a squid, but to practice, he decided to use cow code as a basis. What came of it? For example, players were able to milk squids. It didn't always work, but if you hit the squid with an empty bucket at a certain angle, you could get milk. This wasn't the only bug related to squids. From time to time, squids would float out on the water on the servers and just swim across the sky without taking any damage. It was interesting to watch. Of course, there were also simpler bugs, such as placing a door on a cactus, which would drop and dupe at the same time. Cactus were problematic in general at first, because if you place a bed next to one, it would be cut in half, but you could still sleep on it. Enchantments also appeared in beta version, in particular, Silk Touch. This means that you can get Ice Block. For what? For another bug. Because if you place this block in another, when it melts, water will appear, and the game will not try to dry it out. This way you could cool down the entire nether. By the way, there were other dupes besides the cactus and the door. I think everyone knows about them. To repeat it, you need to create a small stream that leads to the portal, place a crafting table and place the block or item you want to duplicate in it. As soon as the player approached the portal, the item was thrown out and created a copy that remained on the ground. It could be used in crafts. Of course, this is not the only way to duplicate items. There was another way using redstone. If you create a fast clock using 2 repeaters, connect it all to a sticky piston and regular piston, and then close the mechanism, the pistons will start working endlessly. At this point, you had to approach the sticky piston and place any block. Then adjust the delay on the 3rd repeater. After that, the blocks began to generate at breakneck speed, and you just had to mine them in time. Version 1.0.0 is the official release of Minecraft. The game came out of beta and was presented at Minecon 2011 as a full-fledged product, but release did not mean that the bugs were gone. Although I must admit, there were no unusual loud bugs, except for a couple. This version introduced the End, and with it, the Ender Dragon. Its main problem was that during development, for some reason, the Ender Dragon couldn't decide who it wanted to attack, the player or the Enderman. Because of its indecision, the dragon simply rushed from side to side, creating the appearance that it was dancing. But this bug was only present during development, so it cannot be reproduced. Although there is another one. It is related to snow golems. The thing is, for some reason, snow golems would go into love mode. All you had to do was feed them some wheat. Nothing else happened after that, but they start to fight. There was also a small bug related to minecarts. I think you are familiar with it too. If you stack a lot of minecarts on top of each other and then push them a little, they will move very quickly even without rails until they hit a block. And if there are no blocks, they will move forever. Version 1.2 added a few things to the game, such as the Iron Golem, which could be found in villages, and the Ocelot, which could be found in the jungle and turn into a cat after being tamed. Remember when cats used to scare away creepers instead of phantoms? Those were the days. By the way, there was a very funny bug in this version. Creepers exploded after death. This is doubly funny because in the early stages of development, creepers behave exactly like this. They would just jump on the player dealing damage and then explode after death. In one of the snapshots for this version, there wasn't so much a bug as misunderstanding. If you translated the game into African instead of a single player button, there was a bad word written for the players. This was not done on purpose, of course. As I have said many times, the translation for Java version is done by the community, and sometimes, due to mistakes, something like this ended up in the game. I have already said that sometimes bugs can become a feature of the game, and this time it affects the cobweb block. In one of the snapshots, cobweb started preventing fall damage, and this was a mistake that was fixed in the next snapshot. Ultimately, this bug became a feature of the cobweb. In the same version, villagers, for some unknown reason, become almighty and could open not only wooden doors, but also iron doors without a redstone signal. Zombies, by the way, were not inferior in strength and could break down iron doors without any problems. Version 1.3 delighted all players with Ender Chest and Emeralds. It wasn't a big update, but it did have a couple of bugs. For example, when placing an item in the creative menu, items were duplicated. Each time you placed them in a new slot, there were more of them. If you look at Enderman in survival mode, he didn't become aggressive and just ignore you. He was like a friendly Enderman. But trouble came from where we least expected it. Nether and End were not generated. When entering these dimensions, nothing loaded, and after a while the player was killed with an error. The same thing happened in the End dimension. The pretty scary update 1.4 introduced a second boss to the game, Wither. Fun fact, Jeb added him to the game after being inspired by Terraria. This is because the game has a boss summoning mechanic, but the name itself was taken from the game Whispers in Ekra, which ironically was also created by Jeb. There was a poison potion that drained the player's health, and the potion was called Wither. Although Jeb was a talented programmer, this version was riddled with bugs. For some reason, the largest number of bugs with the game crashes occurred during the development of this version. I'm not kidding. You build a pyramid of the diamond blocks, place a beacon, which by the way also appeared in this version, activate it, and the game crashes. Want to try fishing in the nether portal? The game crashes. Put an item frame on the server, you get kicked. Take an empty map from the chest, the game crashes. Drop an anvil on an end crystal, the game crashes. Decided to resize the game window while using an anvil, crash. This is just a small part of what could happen. There were some common bugs, but they weren't particularly interesting. This version had a lot of problems, at least with lightning, in almost every snapshot. Perhaps because of this, zombies didn't want to burn in sunlight, while skeletons burn very nicely. The only interesting bug was the firework star duplication. After creating the most ordinary firework star, you just had to add a new secondary effect using a material. In my case, it was a dye, and there had to be more of it than the stars themselves. By placing everything in the crafting table, the player got countless new stars, spending only the material. Redstone Update 1.5 introduced quartz to the game. Yes, Did you think it was Redstone? No, it appeared in the alpha version, as I already mentioned. But all sorts of different things related to Redstone did appear, such as a hopper, dropper, a trap chest, and of course a comparator. The situation with bugs is complicated. There were some, but they were minor. For example, flying boats. From time to time, when the player left the world and then returned, the boat could for some reason be in the air. This was not a one-off occurrence, because in addition to boats, minecarts that had come off the rails were also levitating in the air. Every time you re-entered the world, they started heading in the air. Of course, there were dupes, and hoppers appeared in the game for the first time, which subsequently almost always took the top spots among the blocks that helped to dupe items. Duping items was easier than easy. You just had to quickly throw an item into the hopper and then open it. Then 2 items would appear in the hopper at once. If you managed to transfer zombie pigment to the overworld, the game couldn't determine whether this mob should burn in the sun or not. So from time to time a burning animation appeared that did not damage. Although it was useless, you could also duplicate a bow. When its durability reached 1, you had to shoot 2 more times, and then the bow would become new. If you shoot again, it would break. But instead, you could place it into inventory, and then it would be completely a normal bow. Common blocks that cannot be destroyed or used in survival mode, for some reason during the development of this version, they were instantly destroyed by any tool and could be interacted with. The Horse Update 1.6, oddly enough, added horses to the game. When Minecraft sold 10 million copies, Jeb gave a very subtle hint about the main theme of the 1.6 update. He simply posted a photo of horse. Incidentally, the horses were inspired by the More Creatures mod by Dr. Jarky, who also developed them for this update. Development didn't take very long, so there aren't many interesting bugs. I can only highlight a couple of interesting ones. For example, the Silk Touch enchantment behaved strangely. If you use this enchantment to obtain an activated redstone lamp, it would drop as an item. It seems very convenient, but after placing it, the lamp turned off and needed redstone. The most interesting bug, in my opinion, was related to the flying boats. When the player created a giant waterfall and then used the bug to push the boat into the blocks, it could rise above the water without any problems. Remember, there were no bubbles yet. This way, the player could climb to the very top and then just start floating in the clouds on the boat. The game thought the player was still in the water, but slowly lowered them to the ground. The update that changed the world 1.7. It really did change the world. Generation became completely different. The famous chicken jug appeared, along with colored glass and many new biomes, including the savanna, badlands, and flower forest. In addition to the many biomes, there were also many bugs. One of these was impossible trades. Sometimes, after being traded with a few times, librarians would offer players impossible deals. For example, this one. We must buy a Bane of Arthropods for 1 regular book and 66 emeralds. The only problem is that you can't have more than 64 items in one slot. So how do you get 66? Only with commons. At some point, the chicken decided that nether warts were very tasty and that they could be used to breed more chickens, but they didn't react to it if the player was holding the wart in their hands. The Bountiful Update 1.8 brought a lot to the game, such as the mysterious ocean monuments and the guardians inside them. There were bugs too, but overall they were standard. For example, item duplication. This is already a tradition for every version of Minecraft, but this time duplication only works in creative mode. Yes, I know it's strange, but that's a feature. If you throw items out of your inventory using the Ctrl plus key combination and then opens the chest, the items will appear in the player's inventory. The original items will still be on the ground. If you don't have gold for the powered rail, don't worry. Ordinary rails are fine. Just put a pick in the minecart, saddle it, and then push it away. It will travel endlessly at a very decent speed. Here we may encounter 2 bugs related to wolves. The first is that after taming, their leash turns orange instead of red. The second is that something strange happens to the little wolf head. For some reason, it shifts slightly to the side. I have another dupe in reserve. This time a rail. Yes, the classic rail dupe that many have used. It's somewhat similar to the old block dupe using pistons. The principle is the same. You need to create a redstone clock and then simply bring the redstone to 2 sticky potions. As a result, you get any rails in a matter of seconds. Baby zombies are very fast enemies that are difficult to fight. Who would have thought that if you use a name tag with the nickname Dinnerbone, in this version it will also start levitating? In fact, for some reason the name tag activates the normal zombie model, and even the hitboxes work. You know that unpleasant feeling when you search for Ender Portal for a long time, finally get there and find that the one frame is broken. In this version that wasn't a problem, because even a broken portal could be activated without any issues. Another strange bug is difficult to classify as a duplication, but if the player splits an item into two equal parts and then uses the shift-click combination to throw item into the first slot of an anvil, an item with the zero quantity will appear. You can pick it up, it will be displayed in a hotbar, but you won't be able to throw it away or move it to another slot. Well, you could also put a cactus in the water and it wouldn't even break. The latest version in this part is 1.9 Combat Update. It is one of the most controversial versions, as it brought a lot to the game. A new combat system. Some people didn't like it so much that they still play version 1.8. Feel free to share your opinion in the comment section. But in addition to the combat update, this is also a kind of end update, because we now have the outer islands where cozy end cities are located. There weren't that many bugs, and they were all technical, but the most important one is related to elytras, a bug that was later turned into a feature. The thing is, elytras were not originally created for the flying, but for sliding down smoothly. But it so happened that Minecraft players were able to discover a small bug that allowed them to fly almost indefinitely. All you need is elytras, a bow with a second level knockback enchantment, and food. Yes, I think you can already guess what this is about. When flying on elytras, the players shot themselves with a bow and the arrow hit them, thereby slightly accelerating and throwing him upward. Players liked this bug so much that the developers added the ability to accelerate yourself with fireworks in version 1.11. That's how a bug became an integral part of the game. The second most important bug is, of course, the dupe. It was actually quite unusual. To implement it, you need two players and obviously a server. One player had to collect the blocks and items they wanted to duplicate in their inventory. Then the second player had to place TNT near them. After that, the second player would leave and the first player would quickly activate the TNT. At the moment of explosion, the first player's entire inventory would be thrown out, even if it wasn't on a server. When players came back, they were alive, and all their items were still there. It was an unusual method, but it worked. Bugs in Minecraft are what unite every version, and I'm not afraid to say that they even make the game better at some point. After all, without bugs, we wouldn't have flight on elytras or powered rails. Of course, we shouldn't romanticize them, because they still mess up the game. Think about Bedrock. I'm afraid to even imagine it. The second part is coming soon after we get 1000 likes. We've got almost 10 years of new and interesting bugs ahead of us. While you're waiting for the next video, check out these ones. They're just as interesting. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, smash that like button and hit the notification bell. See you soon, because we discover Minecraft in a whole new way.